Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
David Cameron says he's strongly against the idea of Britain adopting looser ties with the EU in the way that Norway has. Some Eurosceptics argue that the country's a good example of how the UK could leave the EU but stay in the single market. The Prime Minister has travelled to Iceland this afternoon, which has a similar deal to Norway, to discuss his plans to renegotiate Britain's EU membership. Our political editor, Laura Kunsberg, is in Reykjavik. Laura.
Sophie, for months, David Cameron has avoided the nitty-gritty of this debate, concentrating instead on improving our relationship with the rest of the EU to try to persuade us to vote to stay. But that's changed now. His critics say it's because he's panicking, but Number 10 believes it's time to start making their arguments, starting with a warning that a looser friendship like this country has with the EU would take us in the wrong direction.
The Otto's been at sea for 5 days, on the outer edge of Europe and on the edge of the EU. It's a good catch, more than 100 tons, mainly destined for French kitchens. Iceland, like Norway and Switzerland too, sell their wares to the EU without being fully in the club.
I think business is blooming. And has been blooming for many years. And of course,
Captain Christian Gislason says that works fine.
We mostly do business with the European Union countries, so it's a kind of a business coalition with the EU, a backdoor business we have with them. So we are quite well off as we are.
So if Iceland isn't completely frozen out, having given up talking about joining the EU, could that kind of looser arrangement work for us?
Some people have said the Norway option is available to Britain, and I think it's just worth understanding what that means. Norway pays as much per head into the European Union as we do. When it comes to migration, they actually have many more people coming to live and work in Norway than we do. And yet, while they pay, they don't get a say. They don't have a seat round the table. They don't have a chance to influence the debate and get things done in Europe in the way that we do.
It's easy to ask, if Norway and Iceland flourish as friends but not full partners of the EU, then why can't we? But David Cameron believes it's just not that straightforward. If we wanted to trade, we'd probably have to obey most of the rules and pay for the privilege. And likely we'd still have to let EU citizens come to Britain to live and work. Figuring it all out would be a tangled process that could go on for years.
But here, keeping a friendly distance has worked. Iceland's PM believes they've recovered from the crash precisely because they're not in the EU.
Being outside of the EU has been essential in us reaching the place we are now.
The looser relationship works for you. Could it be a model for the UK?
It may be one of the things they want to look into when they have this debate about Britain's relationship with the European Union. Maybe some third alternative would be better for the UK. I couldn't say, or at least I wouldn't like to speculate.
Those who'd be happier out of the EU with Iceland and others say the Prime Minister is now panicking. That's denied, but no longer will he hang back from the arguments. He'll build his own. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Reykjavik.
The Prime Minister says there's no third way for Britain and the EU. We're either in or we're out. David Cameron warned that following the example of Norway, which has access to the single market without joining the EU, was not the solution. Our Deputy Political Editor Chris Shipp is in Downing Street. So, Chris, do we assume from this that Mr Cameron wants to stay in?
Well, you know, Mark, what I think we got from the Prime Minister today was some of the clarity which, to be frank, has been missing from his arguments over the EU referendum in recent months. And what he's essentially said is What is the point in leaving the European Union if we end up like Norway or like Iceland? Now, both of those countries are outside the European Union. They pay per head of population roughly the same amount of money we do in order to be able to trade with the 28 members of the EU. And for that privilege, they have to accept all the rules and regulations, including, by the way, the free movement of people. And at the same time, they get no say in the direction of travel of the EU because they don't have a seat at the table. Now, Mr. Cameron is discussing all this at a summit in Iceland this evening. He arrived in Reykjavik a short while ago. And when there, he said it was important really for Britain to understand exactly what the alternatives are.
We're going to go on with this debate, and I've ruled nothing out. If we don't get what we need, I rule absolutely nothing out. But as we go through this debate, let's make sure we don't start looking at options that aren't attractive.
Now, this outbreak of clarity, if you like, rather threw down the gauntlet to the Eurosceptics inside his own party. I spoke to several of them today. They accuse the Prime Minister of doing Britain down. We have an economy, they argue, is much, much bigger than Norway's. Therefore, the other 27 members of the European Union are going to want to do free trade deals with us so we can buy their goods and they can buy ours. But I think whatever else tonight, we don't know what he wants from this EU renegotiation. We now know what the Prime Minister doesn't want.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed.
I've been getting